The absolute key is the plan that we put together has to represent that young person. And that's why we ask, what's the vision? What's important to you? Because I want to make sure that plan is unique to that young person.
G'day, I'm Debra Caldow. Welcome to the Red Giraffe Solutions Expanding Worlds podcast, where we aim to support you as you help your young person with additional needs plan for their future, a future where they're safe, secure, and live a rewarding and fulfilling life. From around the world, I share stories and I share solutions from people making this possible right now. I'm a parent of a young person with additional needs, so I understand the challenges. Many of the people I've interviewed on this podcast have already helped me design a better future for my daughter, and I hope that they might help you as well to imagine what's possible for your young person. One of the things I've realised is that the legacy that I leave my daughter is more than just about money, but money is also pretty important, because without me doing some form of financial planning, she isn't going to be able to live the life that she wants after I'm no longer around. So in the last few years, we've spent a lot of time working on building, for want of a better word, a financial fortress for her, so that when we do go, her life can pretty much continue as it is now. But putting this together hasn't been without its challenges. And so whilst I wish I'd talked to my guest on this week's episode about 5 years ago, I'm also delighted to be able to share her insights with others. My guest is Rhiannon Gogh, and she's a financial planner. She's based in the UK, and obviously that's important in terms of what she talks about, but I don't think it's as important as you might think, because what she's talking about are universal ideas. It doesn't matter where we live in the world, we all need to recognise how important it is to plan for our children's financial futures after we're gone. In this first part of my conversation with Rhiannon, we talk about the fear that a lot of us seem to have about planning ahead. I can recognise that fear, because it's hard to sit down and really be objective about money. Money is a topic that we don't like to talk about. We don't like to talk about it with other people, and sometimes we don't even like to think about it. And that's why it's so important to have the kind of resources that Rhiannon talks about that get us thinking about it. And just to say that there's links to the resources that she talks about in this episode in the show notes. So enough from me, let's hear more from Rhiannon. Rhiannon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Can we start off by finding a little bit about you and then what you do?
I'm a chartered financial advisor. Thank you for having me on, but by the way, I just jumped straight in there with chartered financial advisor, but I am. And I'm a mum to a profoundly autistic young man. His name is Tristan. He's 15. I'm an author of Planning with Love, and I am a special needs planner, a proud special needs planner. I'm probably one of the only ones in the UK that specialises in helping families plan for the future when they have a young person with vulnerabilities.
So what kind of things do you do when you work with families?
I help them plan for the time, and this is heavy, but I'm just going to say it. I help them plan for the time when they're no longer here. When people come to me, it's because they're worried about what's going to happen to their young person when they're no longer here. And I help them plan for that. I help them plan their estate so they can pass money safely. I help them plan for the vision. For example, with Tristan, I think about an exciting future for him, and that takes some planning. And that's what I help families do, helping plan, helping them avoid the pitfalls. And for some reason, revealing this because it's hidden. All of these special needs planning hints and tips and secrets seem hidden and so hard to find. So sharing information, helping families plan and helping their young person get the best possible future.
Why aren't we talking about it more? Is it because it's that big question of what happens when I die and people don't want to talk about dying anyway?
I mean, it is really tough to sit down and have these thoughts. So many parents don't want to think about this, and I completely get that. And listen, I've talked to parents who have come to see me, and it's taken them, they come and talk to me. It can take them years before they're ready to come back and see me later and say, right, I've had a chance to think about this. I'm ready to go forward. So number one, it's really tough to think about it. It forces you to ask really difficult questions. Number two, there isn't a pathway in the UK. Well, there is now, and I'm just starting it because I've got the book and I've launched an alliance of special needs planners and solicitors and charity professionals. But before that, there was no recognised pathway for special needs planning. Now, this is different to the US. So in the US, if I'm a family of a child with disabilities, I can find myself a chartered special needs consultant, a financial planner, skilled in guiding me through this area. That does not exist here. And I'm doing everything I can to change it. I'm confident I will change it. But I think for those two reasons, it's not been part of the conversation.
So if I rock up, where do we start? What do we talk about?
First of all, I would want to know what it is that's worrying you. That sounds like a silly thing to ask you, and maybe a little bit of a triggering thing to ask you. But your worry or your concerns or what is important to you, Deborah, will be different to what is important for me with my family. And because the person we're planning for is very different. So I would want to know when a family comes up to see me, I'd want to know what it is that's worrying them or concerning them, what it is they most want to plan for. Are they worried their young person will be vulnerable and they want to protect them? Are they worried their young person will lose means-tested benefits? Have they heard some horror stories about that and they want to protect against that? So what is it that's worrying them? And then I want to flip it on its head and say, okay, so what is the best vision for this young person's future? If we can include them in that vision planning, great. But with my son, you couldn't include him. So I would want to know what's worrying Rhiannon and what does she really want to get in place for Tristan so that she knows that he'll have every chance of thriving in the future. And that's the starting place.
But how do you get people to think about that? Because that seems like such a big thing. And maybe if I walk up to you and I haven't really, I mean, I may be afraid of what would happen. So, for example, my daughter would be vulnerable to someone taking her money from her. I can articulate that. But how do you then move me from that to actually putting a plan in place? And what might that plan look like?
There's a framework in the book called the Leads framework that I use with families, and I try to get them to think about different areas because it's such an open question. If I said to you, tell me about the future, it's like, exactly which bit of the future do you want me to tell you about? So I break it down into a framework and I call it the Leads framework. So tell me about where you see your son living, whether he's employed, what your aspirations are, who might help him with decisions, who would support him. So LEADS. And I would want them to paint a picture around that framework. And usually, once a parent starts talking about, they start off, it's difficult to get them to stop, quite frankly, because they're often a trail. So I can get them to put together that framework. And then for me as a financial planner, I can think, right, how are we going to fund that? How are we going to secure that for them? And how am I going to start putting together the team, bearing in mind that mum and dad might not always be here? What kind of team can I get into place to make sure there'll always be someone there for that young person to support them in their dreams too? So lots of estate planning plans that I carry out, some funding. So are they going to be means tested funding? If they're not, where are we going to create a trust fund, for example, for treats and for top ups? I had one mum and I asked her that question, what's your dream of the future? And she had a very specific dream. And we talked about setting up a trust fund. And I said to her, we're going to set up this trust fund. What do you see it being used for? And she said to me, every single week, I will be using money from the trust with him to go to Marks and Spencer and buy him some lovely meals, and we'll put that in his fridge and make sure that he always has lovely food to eat. And it can be something really simple but meaningful like that. Or it could be another mum, I remember, she said, trust fund to him would mean taking him out on trips to the beach. Something that he can't do in the residential home. I'd like him to have extra funding in that area. The absolute key is, and I get really passionate about this, the plan that we put together has to represent that young person. There is no point me just creating a bog standard one size fits all plan because it's not going to mean anything to that young person. It's not going to give them what they want. And that's why we ask, what's the vision? What's important to you? Because I want to make sure that plan that I get in place is unique to that young person.
You mentioned there about trust. Trust seem to have a reputation as being complicated and difficult. Is that the case?
The honest truth is, yes, they are complicated. However, for the last 10 years, I have done everything I possibly can to make them accessible and understandable for parents. And that's why I wrote the book, to try and demystify it. Because there's nothing more heartbreaking than hearing from a family who needed a trust. They could have secured the future of the young person, but they didn't know that A, trusts exist. Nobody took the time to sit down with them and talk to them about trust and explain how they work. As a special needs parent, I know there is so much to know about. I get that. We're trying to be a specialist in 100 different areas. But trusts are the key to protecting a young person's future. They are the key. Yes, are they complex? Absolutely. But that's why I wrote the book, to break them down, to make them more accessible. And hey, you don't need to, as a special needs parent, understand the ins and outs of trusts. You simply have to have an understanding that they are the key to protecting a young person. You need to know how to get one in place, i.e., go to a solicitor that's qualified, a TAP qualified solicitor ideally, Trust and Estates Practitioner TEP, and you need to know that they are the key. And you need to know who to trust to help you get one in place. That's the sort of minimum. We don't need to know the ins and outs. But in answer to your question, yeah, sure, they're complicated. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. Absolutely not.
What do you say to people that would say to you, well, I haven't got anything to put in a trust anyway? My personal perception before we got into having one was it tends to be for richer people.
So I did a seminar in a special school years and years ago. And it was about wills and trusts. And at the very, very end, this mum rushed up to me and she said, right, absolutely, I'm sold. I need a will and a trust. Help me get a will and a trust. I need to provide for my young 5-year-old son with autism. And I said to her, okay, great. So we had a little chat. Right, so the will and the trust within the will is going to protect what you leave behind. So what have you got to leave behind? And she said, oh, nothing. Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. I'm in a rented house. I've just come out of a messy divorce. I have very little. In that circumstance, is the will and the trust right for her? You never know what the future holds. So she could walk away from that meeting with me, someone could die, leave her some money, and all of a sudden she's had an inheritance. So I think it's always worth it. However, in her circumstance, and I put a whole chapter in the book about life insurance, and I say the words life insurance, and I can almost hear people's eyes rolling. But bear with me for a second, because for this mum, what we did instead was she bought a life insurance policy. It cost her about £30 a month. Life insurance companies will give you a free trust to wrap around a life insurance policy. So for £30 a month, we managed to get her, I think it was about £150,000 worth of cover. And that meant if she dies on a Monday, on a Tuesday, £150,000 will be paid into a trust, no probate, no inheritance tax, and even smarter, we managed to put a trustee on that trust who was her sister. So we've now, for £30 a month, secured a tax-free trust fund for her son. He's got the protection of a trust and he's got a guardian and trustee built into. There are solutions for every type of wealth. There's so much you can do. You can write a letter of wishes for nothing. There's free templates on my Instagram page. Go and have a look at that. Costs nothing. It's not legally binding. Yep, I know that, but you can still document your wishes, and I've seen those used in family courts. So it's not just for the wealthy.
Like everything we need to support our children, it's about knowledge, and it's about knowing where to look for the resources that you need. And the work Rhiannon is doing and the resources she's creating are helping make things easier and more accessible. In the next episode, where I continue my conversation with Rhiannon, we talk more about trusts, specifically the challenges around who to choose as trustees, as well as talking more about why finding specialised planning advice is so important. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope that the stories and solutions shared on here help you as you support your young person to create their future. If you know anyone who would find the ideas useful, please share the podcast with them. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Debra Caldow. I'd love to have a conversation with you on any of the topics we all care about. Bye for now.